1944. Europe is engulfed in the flames of World War II. But on a narrow, unassuming strip of land called the Narva Isthmus, the outcome of the Eastern Front is about to be shaped. Here, under the brutal Baltic skies, two of the 20th century's greatest tyrants, Hitler and Stalin, would unleash their armies in a grueling and bloody conflict. But what was so significant about this small piece of land? Why did thousands fight, die, and disappear in these dense forests, frozen rivers, and unforgiving swamps? Today, we'll explore the Battle of Narva, a battle not just of bullets and bombs, but of ideologies, political ambitions, and a fierce determination for freedom. It was a battle that, for a brief moment, held the attention of the world, one that shaped the fates of Finland, Estonia, and even the Soviet Union itself. So, if you think you know World War II, think again, because the battle we're about to explore reveals secrets and sacrifices that most history books overlook. Are you ready? Setting the stage. To understand why Narva was so crucial, we have to look at the terrain. Narva isn't just a narrow strip of land. It's a natural choke point surrounded by impassable swamps and dense forests. With its rivers and frozen waterways, the landscape was a nightmare for moving troops or machinery. Yet, it was this very landscape that made Narva so strategically valuable. Whoever controlled Narva controlled a gateway to the Baltic Sea. For Stalin, Narva was essential for launching attacks against Finland and potentially pushing German forces out of the Baltics. For Hitler, it was the only remaining shield protecting Germany's northern borders and vital Swedish iron ore shipments. Losing Narva would mean handing the Soviets a stepping stone into Germany's front yard. The Soviet objectives. In February 1944, Stalin made his intentions crystal clear. He issued an ultimatum to his commanders on the front: capture Narva at any cost. His deadline was February 17th. But why the urgency? Stalin's sights were set on driving the Germans out of Estonia to open up a route for Soviet forces into Finland and eventually into East Prussia, Germany's stronghold. To Stalin, Narva was more than a battle. It was an opportunity to secure control over Estonia and influence Finland. With an exit from the Gulf of Finland, the Soviet Baltic Fleet would gain a critical advantage in the region. But Stalin's goal wasn't just about territory, it was political. Estonia was to be liberated and integrated into the Soviet sphere, conquest he believed was inevitable. The German counter-strategy. The German high command, however, had no intention of yielding. They knew that if Narva fell, the Soviet fleet could threaten Germany's Baltic supply lines, and the German people would face the Soviet forces closer than ever. German Colonel General George Lindemann's order was simple: hold Narva at all costs. This was more than a defensive maneuver. It was a lifeline for the Third Reich's supply routes and military infrastructure. In response, the Germans fortified the region, bringing in elite divisions such as the Nordland Division, comprised of multinational volunteers, alongside Estonian conscripts and other forces. For the Germans, defending Narva was about maintaining control over the entire Baltic Sea. For the Estonians under German command, it was a chance to prevent the Soviet reoccupation of their homeland. Beginning of the battle. February 2, 1944, the Soviets made their first move, launching the Kingisepp-Dov offensive, crossing the Narva River with heavy firepower and establishing bridgeheads to the north and south of Narva. Stalin's deadline loomed, and the Soviet forces advanced with determination, unleashing artillery and tanks to break German lines. But the defenders of Narva didn't buckle. Estonian conscripts and German soldiers fought side by side, aware that their homeland was at stake. The Estonians, having seen the brutal Soviet occupation in 1940, were determined to resist at any cost. For many of them, this wasn't just a battle, it was a fight for freedom. The fierce resistance. Despite their overwhelming numbers, the Soviets quickly discovered that Narva was no easy target. German and Estonian forces launched ferocious counterattacks, often under brutal winter conditions, using every inch of the frozen terrain to their advantage. For weeks, Soviet bridgeheads were repeatedly destroyed, and the defensive line held strong. Each Soviet assault was met with fierce resistance. Estonian soldiers, seeing the looming threat of another Soviet occupation, fought with a fire and determination that Stalin hadn't anticipated. They were defending not just a piece of land, but their families, their homes, and their culture. A strategic deadlock. By March, what Stalin thought would be a swift victory had turned into a nightmare. Despite relentless Soviet offensives, the Germans held the line, using terrain to channel Soviet forces into tight kill zones. German counterattacks wreak havoc on Soviet bridgeheads, leaving the Soviets struggling to hold the ground. Stalin's frustration boiled over. On March 6th, he ordered a massive air assault to level Narva, hoping to demoralize the defenders and force a breakthrough. But even this relentless bombing only served to strengthen the defenders' resolve. Both sides dug in, and the battle became a brutal test of endurance. The Tannenburg Line, a last line of defense. By July, it was clear that Narva could not be held indefinitely. The Germans withdrew to the Tannenburg Line, a fortified position in the Cinemate Hills, just 16 kilometers away. This line would become the Germans' final stand, a place where they were determined to hold back the Soviet advance at any cost. The Tannenburg Line was ideal for defense. The hills provided a natural barrier, and the Germans took full advantage, turning the landscape into a fortress. But the Soviets weren't backing down. On July 25th, they launched a massive assault, throwing everything they had at the German positions. Soviet artillery and tanks battered the hills, and the battle descended into brutal close-quarters combat. The climactic battle for the Tannenburg Line. The climax of the battle came on July 29th. The Soviet forces launched a series of ferocious assaults on the Tannenburg Line. Soviet shock troops stormed the hills, only to be met with German heavy artillery and a wall of defensive fire. In a desperate struggle, the two sides clashed in hand-to-hand combat, with each inch of ground contested. At one point, the Soviets managed to break through and encircle a German position, but a counterattack led by an improvised German battle group forced them back. It was a Pyrrhic victory, as the German lines held, but at a tremendous cost. For every Soviet soldier who charged the hills, many more were lost in the brutal assault. The aftermath and fall of Narva. After months of intense fighting, the Germans finally withdrew from Narva in August 1944, leaving the city in ruins. The Soviets had achieved a bitter victory, but at a staggering cost. The toll of the Battle of Narva had hampered Soviet progress, delaying Stalin's plans for a full invasion of the Baltic region. For Estonia, the victory was hollow. Thousands of Estonians fled westward, seeking refuge from the incoming Soviet forces. Yet, for all their strength, the Soviets couldn't extinguish the Estonian spirit of resistance. While Estonia would fall under Soviet occupation, the seeds of independence had been sown in the hearts of its people. The Battle of Narva was one of World War II's most ferocious and underappreciated clashes. It showed that even in the darkest of times, hope and resilience can inspire incredible courage. If you found this story as compelling as we did, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. And remember, history has many more hidden stories waiting to be told.